Let's move on to the next thing. Just going to head on back to FigJam here. Now we've got virtual lights, and hopefully by the time those of you who are watching this video see it, you'll be able to have the little link underneath here. But we're going to just introduce them real fast. So first things first, when we're inside Blender, you can't see the lights in solid mode. So as a quick reminder, we have a couple viewport modes. This is the mode for wireframe. This is the mode for solid. And then this is the material preview mode. We're going to be in here a little bit today while we play with materials, but the only one that actually shows lights by default is this last one. This is the rendered mode. And right now we only have one light in the scene, and it's this light. Earlier I made it so you can't touch it, but I've turned that back on so we can touch it. And what we're seeing here in this rendered view is this digital version of what this looks like. Now, I've talked about this before, and I'm going to talk about it much more in the rendering section, but there are two different render modes inside Blender. And to get to them, you come over here. I'm just going to grab this little window and pull it up a bit so we can see it. Now, with all these different icons along the side, the one on the top here is the render, and that shows you your render engine. The fast calculation render engine is called Eevee. It stands for Extra Easy Environmental... shoot, I've forgotten it. Extra Easy Environment Engine, I think is what it is, but I'm not 100% sure. The other one is cycles. So when I click on cycles, you'll see that now I'm starting to get this like sample happening, and all of my shadows are a lot more accurate. As I move these things around, I'm gonna hit grab and just move it over here. You can see how the shadows are kind of changing, and there's like this odd kind of sharper shadow versus a softer shadow. All of that stuff is because of how Eevee and cycles works. Now, as we get into lighting, we're going to be going back and forth between looking at what something does in Eevee and looking at what something does in cycles, and the same thing with materials. So both of those things are going to be happening. What I want to do though is I want to kind of make some new lights and show you some of the differences of those lights. So without further ado, I'm going to press and hold Shift S. Now that's going to bring up my 3D cursor menu. And I'm going to send my 3D cursor to the world origin. And that's my 3D cursor. It's at my world origin. I'm going to hit my period button because I'm not quite at something here. That didn't take me where I exactly wanted to go. And let's go ahead and make a new light. Anytime we want to make anything, we hit Shift A. Now before, when we've hit Shift A, we've only been making mesh. So this is the first time we're using Shift A to add something other than a mesh in these tutorials, and we're going to come down to light, and we see that there are 4 different kinds of light. So we're going to look at the point and the spot and the area first, and then I'll finish with the sun. So okay, point. I've made a point light. I'm now going to hit G and Z, and that moves it, and it constrains it, moves it up. All right, now with this light selected, I want to be able to adjust it and have it affect the space. Right now it's not strong enough, and so it's not affecting the space at all. You see just a little bit of light hitting this icosphere, but it's not really, UV sphere, but it's not really doing anything big time. So we're going to switch to the space where we actually affect the light's properties. So I click on this, and this little icon changes depending on what you have selected. So if I selected this torus, I'm now affecting the properties for that torus. If I selected the cylinder or any of these meshes, when I select the camera, it gives me camera properties. When I select the light, it's giving me the light properties, and that's where I want to kind of stick around to and stay with. I'm going to press and hold Shift and the middle mouse button on my mouse and just scoot over. Sweet, so I see some properties here. And the first one that I want to play with you all is power. And I tend to bracket the power. So as I'm looking at things, I want to make sure that I am seeing how this thing is working. So I'm just going to turn off this other light real fast in my outliner. And I can see just this light. I'm also going to turn mouse posé off. I'll be over here, so just pay attention to this space. And I'm going to start with 1. This is 1 watt of power, and you can see that it's not doing anything to the space at all because it just doesn't have enough oomph. 10 watts. I'm going to click in here and do 100 and tap enter. Now we can start seeing some real effects. I'll do 1,000. See even more effects, and I'm going to do 10,000. This time I'm just going to add a 0. And we start to see how that one little light starts to blow some power up. Now, I have some options here with this 1 point light. I'm going to pop it down back to 100, now 1000. So it's not blowing things up completely, but it's definitely illuminating the space. I have some options, and one of them is the radius. So let's look at this radius. I'm going to click, hold, and drag. And what I'm doing is I'm changing the fall off. So what does this mean? I have 1,000 watts of power, but I'm now putting I'm distributing that 1,000 watts of power across a circle that's across a radius a sphere that has a radius of 3.6 meters. So that's something like 12 feet, 9 feet, closer to, actually it was closer to 12. So this radius doesn't change the power, but it changes how big the light is. And so even though I've got 1,000 watts with my radius at 9 meters, if I zoom out, you can see it's able to capture so much more. Let me go ahead and head on up to my Eevee and switch that from Eevee to cycles, and we'll just see what that looks like. It's a little bit more accurate here of how that light works. And we're going to do the same thing we just did. We're going to kind of do it in reverse though. So let's look at the radius when I shrink it down inside cycles. Again, this is no longer a guess at how the light's working. It's actually calculating how that light is bouncing off of every single face in the environment. I'm going to go ahead and lower it down to 0. So it's one strong point of light. In render engines, this shows up as nothing, but in a mirror, you'll see it as a small orb. So these lights do show up as orbs. All right, we can turn things off and turn things on. I can have it cast shadows or not. You see that? I can have it set multiple importances, which means there's like a refraction, I believe. Reduces the noise and lights on glassy objects. And then I can have it have caustics, so if it's going through transparency, that's kind of a cool thing. All right, let's go ahead and start playing with this at 10,000. So you can see what that does. See, it's slowly building up. By the way, all of this stuff is called noise, and the brighter noises are called fireflies. And so if there's like a little light that shouldn't be where it is, that's called a firefly. A little jargon for you. I'll do 100 this time because we started with 1,000. I'll do 10 and then 1. And you can still see at 1 there's a little bit of influence, but not much. So anyway, that is a point light in Eevee and in cycles. One thing you will see in Eevee is that when we have a point light, you also have some other options, some custom distances, some shadow properties, because shadows are calculated in Eevee in a completely different way than they are in cycles. And like I said, later on today, we'll talk about the differences between these two, but it gives you just the basics.